Hello, friends. Robert Bevan here, author of the Caverns and Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels and short stories. With me is Sam West, and today we'll be talking about the spell Warding Bond.
Bob, I like to think we've developed a warding bond over the past few months, you know?
Yeah, I feel like you're taking a beating by association with me, and I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Oh,
Okay, yeah, Warding Bond's a second level spell for clerics. A couple other domains get it, especially Oath of the Crown. There's a paladin option that has it, a battlesmith artificer gets it, but that's neither here nor there. The gist of it is this is a cleric protective-ish spell. It takes an action to cast. It's got an hour duration with no concentration. That's big. You do have to have wedding rings that are worth like 50 gold a pop, but it doesn't consume them or anything. So that's something, I guess. And it's also kind of like, I don't know, there's some implications there. I'm like, I guess you're just polyamorous, polygamous, just going around marrying a bunch of people. Is that what's happening here? Not important, but that's, a weird element of the spell. You ward a willing creature you touch and create a mystic connection between you and the target until it ends, which again, that duration's an hour, so you got a long while. While within 60 feet of each other, you get bonus +1 to AC and saving throws, have resistance to all damage. Also, each time, the thing you bond has resistance to all damage. Gives a +1 AC while you're within 60 feet of it. If it takes damage, you take the same amount of damage though. So the idea is like you to get the resistance to, like, let's say you take 30 fire damage, you take 15, they take 15.
yeah.
It drops if the spell ends if you drop to 0 hit points or the target becomes more than 60 feet away from you. So you kind of have to stay like tethered close together. Also, it ends if the spell is cast on a different creature.
Now, you do not get a bonus to your AC, correct?
I'm going to read it for like a third time here, but I'm pretty sure the answer to that question is no.
Okay.
Because the target is whoever you touch. While the target is in 60 feet of you, it gains +1 AC into saves and has resistance to all damage. You notably don't. And the only time damage is shared is whenever they take damage, not whenever you take damage. So this kind of is a protective measure that you stick on your fighter, I guess. You stick on your wizard. I don't know. The use cases for it seems somewhat suspect to me, but there are going to be some times where you're like, yeah, this is pretty good.
Yeah, I'm out of the gate. I'm liking this one. This feels like something, like I'm getting suckered into the gimmick, and you're going to tell me I'm wrong. But having read your review, you kind of like this one.
Yeah. So normally I'm not a big fan of spells that don't give you something. And when I say give you something, I mean, in the context of Warding Bond, you aren't getting, like, you're basically, the bonus you're getting here, because the resistance to damage is also a negative because it's like that damage happens to you anyways. So you aren't necessarily removing damage to the whole party. So you're getting like a +1 AC into saves to a single target for a second level spell slot. And that, like, on face value is not very good. But what is good is it takes hit points that otherwise wouldn't be used in a fight and makes them relevant. And I think that is where the spell is kind of interesting. This is saying in fights where your cleric, like if you're playing them, you're regularly finding that you're sitting comfortably well above half your max HP, regularly finding that your paladin is dropping, you're regularly finding your barbarian is dropping, you're regularly finding your monk is dropping. Warding Bond is going to be a way to mitigate them dropping without having to use actions in combat for a very long duration, which is pretty good. It's neat, at least.
Yeah, and that is if your ally is regularly dropping and you're not taking a bunch of hit points. But if you've got this pool of hit points to spare, maybe you're not pulling your weight and you should be in the front lines more.
So that's kind of difficult to say. There are gonna be a lot of party compositions, especially with newer DMs or DMs that just like to throw monsters in a very traditional sense, where it's just like the front line takes the damage, the back line chills out and throws spells and whatever, and hopes the front line lives. There's a fair amount of encounters that are just going to be enemy team smashing into your team and your team's front line taking almost all of the damage while no one else takes damage for the fight. In encounters like that, you're not really not pulling your weight as the cleric by not getting in the thick of it. Like, you don't want to drop concentration on important spells. You don't want to, take your pool of hit points that are half that of the 11th level fighter and, put them on the line. But in an instance where you can leverage that hit points as like a pillow for your fighter, like adding your hit points on top of theirs, that's actually pretty interesting and pretty useful in a way that uses the hit points in a way they otherwise wouldn't be. And I think that's a fair number of tables. I think there are a good chunk of people who will find that as a cleric, you're not taking any damage or much damage, especially in the back line. If you're a front line, this is a lot harder to use. But if you're in the mid to back line, like you're a dedicated full caster, not the plate mail wielding, the mace holding, bashy cleric of war, then you're gonna, I think, see Warding Bond is usable.
But just to be crystal clear, taking damage, like via somebody else with this spell, will wreck your concentration, correct?
This so yeah, you take the same amount of damage. So if
Right.
you're concentrating on something else, because this doesn't take
Yes.
concentration.
Right.
If you're concentrating on something else, yes, that will wreck your concentration. That is something you definitely want to think about. There are a surprising number of cleric spells that don't have concentration that are pretty useful. And there's going to be, like, as an example, spiritual weapon doesn't have concentration, to my knowledge of it. So you can have your spiritual weapon up and have this up at the same time and not really worry about concentration mechanics at all. And that's pretty baller. You can do some pretty useful backline things of just casting like guiding bolts, casting mid or upper spells like the giant fiery day beam spells, right? Any of the things that fire the power of the sun into your enemies. You can do that while also leveraging your hit points. That's pretty good. If you ever want to be doing more protective things, Warding Bond gets a lot worse, right? Like, you don't want to stack this on top of Pro Good and Evil. You don't want to stack this on top of other effects that have concentration, because they'll very quickly, like, you doubling up on those protective measures is going to help this protective measure fall away, and you don't really want that, right? Or the concentration one, at least. At least it's something to consider, right? Maybe you really care just about the first 2 rounds of combat, so okay, regardless if I drop concentration, you're getting Pro Good and Evil, so you don't get massacred by the undead liches. And just in case, you also have the Warding Bond, so I'm soaking HP while it happens. There may be some considerations and times where you consider doing it, but for the most part, you're going to want to not be concentrating on things if you intend to be, like, guaranteeing yourself to take damage. So that's kind of what this does. It's saying, I intend to use these hit points for something, and that is probably going to wreck my concentration after, like, a turn or 2.
Another question. Say you and your warded buddy get hit with an area of effect spell.
If we're looking at the material components, your spouse. Sure. Yes, continue.
You get hit with a fireball. You take 60 damage. Does that mean he takes 30 and you take 90?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. And it does ask me, you say, like, 60 feet's a pretty big range. I would recommend trying to keep it exactly 60 as often as humanly possible for that exact purpose, right? You don't want to be in fireball formation with a Warding Bond up, because you're going to instantly die if you're ever in the same area of effect as the bonded target. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And again, I think that range indicator is interesting. It's definitely long enough that there are going to be a lot of tables where it literally is never thought about, where you're just like, oh, they're on the same battle map as me. Yeah, I'm probably in range for the Warding Bond still. That's not an issue, right? There's going to be plenty of encounters where you're going to be like, yeah, 20 feet away. They're not fireballing us every round. That I have no issue, managing the Warding Bond. There are going to be other tables, though, where your DM figures out, oh, I can force you to split up or get breath weaponed. I can force you to split up or get Circle of Death. I can force you to split it up or, have a giant angry consequences. And it's going to make Warding Bond a different, a more... a challenging spell to use, and I like that. I like that there's some play the DMs can have to make you care about your positioning. Always a fan of things that make you care about where you're standing. And it being such a low cost, and you don't feel like you're losing so much if you're like, crap, you have to break the Warding Bond and only after 2 hits. It will still probably have done something. It will still probably have been an effect that you got something out of. It's got an hour duration, so this is going to last 3 or 4 fights sometimes. All those things combined, I think, make it really low cost, pretty usable in some groups. So yeah, I don't know. I think this is a perfectly fine spell.
I got more questions.
Hit me with them.
All right. Now we've talked about putting this on your big frontline fighters and whatnot, the people built to soak up some damage. What about using it on your squishier fellows, like wizards or something? Ideally they don't want to take any damage at all, but if they do, you can mitigate some of it.
Yes. So I think those circumstances where that will be like even castable, because I think most of the time when you're casting the spell, if it's on a backline character, you're anticipating that backline character taking all of their hit points at once in damage. That's the anticipated outcome, because there aren't a lot of fights where the wizard isn't instantly dying or taking no damage at all. That middle ground of takes like 3 or 4 hits over the course of a fight, that's not going to happen very often. Normally it's the wizards way in over their head with their AC of 13 because mage armor, who takes that? And they're just getting their absolute ass beat by the 3 orcs that got past the paladin, right? Like they're not going to be up for very long, in which case warding bond there, it's just a way to soak, it just sinks a whole bunch more damage on you in not a very useful way. Often it's going to be enough overkill damage anyway. The wizard doesn't like it, really just net negative where it's, oh, us sharing these hit points isn't particularly practical here because I am intended, because in that circumstance, often the cleric is going to be aimed at taking more damage anyway, right? I think that makes it so if you are intending to take damage and try to protect somebody else, your pool of hit points are more valuable than the person you're protecting by a lot. So whenever you're saying, if they take damage, I take it as well, you're endangering them more by taking the excess damage, right? If your wizard ever is getting hit by strewn firebolts and you're intending to, your job is to keep the swarm of gnolls at bay while the shaman is attacking them from the back line, your hit points going down faster means the moment you drop, which will be way quicker with you're taking their damage as well, they're then going to get completely hammered. So I find it like you would need to be in a party where you have a front line and a back line that you're in a part of. So you're like one of 2 or 3 characters that you care about protecting the back line. And in that instance, your front line has failed to do their job to keep them off of the wizard. And in that instance, you have to not be yourself getting smashed as part of that back line. I don't know. I don't see it coming together all that often. And if it does come together, it's going to be like 7-person parties. And in those parties, you're probably better off sticking this on a frontline character anyway. So like, yeah, I don't see it really ever having applicable benefits in almost every circumstance where you could have a backline. There's probably better ways you can protect them. There's probably better ways that you can leverage low HP squishy targets when they become in danger than warding bond and soaking some of their damage.
All right, here's another one. All right, your warded buddy is down to 5 hit points. Well, let's call it 6 hit points.
Sure.
And somebody smashes him for 20. How much damage do you take?
You take 10.
Okay.
So, when the target is hit is whenever it asks, do they have resistance to this damage? And the answer is yes. In this instance, while they have HP, they have resistance to damage. So that then goes, okay, great. We calculate that by making them take half of the 20 damage, which is 10. And then once they take that 10 damage, they go to 0. And then there is still 10 damage that they have been assumed to take. I believe the answer is you take 10. The answer might be you take 6. Those are the 2 outcomes I could see being valid because
I was
you can't.
thinking 3.
So the damage you take is equal to the damage they take, and they have resistance to damage. How this functions, right?
Yeah.
So if it is ruled, and I could be wrong, if it is ruled that they take all of the damage but just don't go below 0, you take 10. If it is ruled that they don't take excess damage below 0 and it drops the amount of damage taken, you would take 6. I don't know which is correct. I personally would rule you take 10, but I'm sure it's going to vary table to table, and I'm sure there's a rules answer out there on the internet somewhere that you could find. But you're never taking more than that. You're never like taking the full brunt of it because the resistance to damage goes away or something.
Okay, last one. Now this is a 2nd level spell.
Yep.
In my imagination, this would get better as it scales up.
Yeah.
Okay.
As you get more and more hit points, the warding bond gets better. The AC bonus and saving throw, like it's very much like a tacked on. Yeah, sure, I guess it's fine. Yeah, but
I like that.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't hurt.
It would have been. Yeah, nobody was asking for it. I think this spell would have been fine without it. But that +1 bonus to AC. Maybe you take 1 less hit.
Yep. And I mean, that's big, right? Like if you're ever passing a save, like again, if this is the difference between passing and failing a fireball save, it's the difference between dealing half the fireball damage to a quarter of the fireball damage to the person that's bonded to you, right? So it is meaningful. There will be 5% extra times where you're not hit or pass a save. That's not nothing. But the bulk of the effect cares about your total hit points. This is even a spell where you could be this cool party where you plan a composition where your objective is just making an unkillable paladin. And barbarians aren't great because they already have resistance to damage, so like it doesn't double up or anything. You really want this on character that doesn't have resistance to damage, but like throw this on a paladin that is taking like heavy armor master, getting 3 reduced damage on all bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing stuff, then giving them resistance to all damage, and then you take tough and they take tough, and you just have this enormous pile of hit points, like 500 plus that monsters have to chew through over 2 characters. It's cute. It's neat. It's a fun little mechanic that is one of the few things in this game that let you kind of do cross-party builds that like collaborate with each other in some interesting ways. Warding Bond is the kind of thing where as you get more and more hit points, it becomes more and more useful. As you are getting higher and higher damage tiers, with resistance mattering more as the numbers get bigger, right? Having 40 damage is more impactful than having 10 damage. It's the difference between 20 and 5, right? So you're almost always going to find that the resistance matters more, the HP pool matters more. As you get to the higher and higher tiers, if you're a cleric and you're like, man, I have 90 hit points, we're not using Warding Bond somebody. It'll at least leverage 45 of them.
All right, I feel like we covered this one pretty good.
Extensively. You had a great list of long questions. Loved it.
Thank you. All right. Well, that was. Oh wait, we needed to rate it. What do you got?
This is a 3 out of 5. I like this spell a lot. I'm really glad it exists. No one is going to be like, oh my god, this has broken the game in half. I can't kill the paladin anymore. No, that's not going to happen. But it is going to be a way that at some tables that you aren't leveraging your hit points, you can leverage them in a cool, interesting way. It's going to be protective. It doesn't take your actions in combat. I'm a fan.
Yeah, for those reasons, I'm going to give it a 4. That's I mean, there are a lot of times when you'll get a lot of use out of this, I think, and yeah, good.
There will be a few tables where it's uncastable, but that's not the end of the world.
All right, well, that was Warding Bond. Thank you, Sam, and thank you all for joining us. We will see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, informative, or entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button below. You needn't smash it. A gentle tap will suffice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you check out the links in the description, where you'll find my Caverns and Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels, Sam's full review of the spell, and other fun things.